careful viewers of this channel may have noticed that recently I've been growing out my hair. But did it occur to you to ask why? Why would I, after many years of the same basic cut and color, why would I finally decide to rebuke my Lord and Savior Ramona Flowers? Well, today I'm going to tell you the reason. It's because I've read a study that made me realize that my female hairdresser was purposely cutting my hair short because she wanted me to be ugly so that she could have all of the men. Did that not make sense to you? Okay, let me describe it in another way. Imagine that I am an apple at the grocery store and my hairdresser is also an apple at the grocery store. Each of us desperately wants a man to pick us over the other. In this scenario, all shoppers in the grocery store are heterosexual men, and each man can only have one apple. So each of us tries to look like the best, most delicious apple, although obviously we're not trying to look like a red delicious apple, which is, as everyone knows, the worst apple. Unfortunately, I am reliant upon my competitor apple to look as delicious as possible. So I stupidly ask her to help me out. In return, she shoves me onto the grocery store floor and I roll under a shelf of those plastic lemons full of juice. And, as she's the expert, I just decide that must be the correct course of action. But then I watch as a man walks over and chooses her instead of me. I've been sabotaged. I cried juicy apple tears. Did that make more sense? No. Look, you just don't understand the sexual marketplace where we buy and sell our goodies while the invisible hand jerks it in the corner. It's fine. Not everybody can be as knowledgeable about economics as me. Anyway, let's get to this study. Off with her hair. Intrasexually competitive women advise other women to cut off more hair, in which the authors hypothesize that catty women will sabotage other women by recommending they cut more hair off than they should because short hair is ugly on all women and all heterosexual men prefer long hair on their mates. This study from a group of evolutionary psychologists at Charles Sturt University in Australia involved asking a total of about 400 heterosexual female undergrads and 23 other women, for some reason, to answer some questions to determine their own mate value scale. Questions like, overall, how would you rate your level of desirability as a partner? And then their mate value inventory, which is rating how many desirable traits apply to them, like generous and good looking and ambitious, and their intrasexual competitiveness, which is judged with things like, I tend to look for negative characteristics in attractive women. Then they asked the participants to pretend that they are hairdressers. They're not. They're undergrad students. They showed them photos of women's faces, all of them of apparent reproductive age, along with a close-up of the person's hair that either showed damage or no damage. And they told them that half of these women wanted them to cut off as little hair as possible, and the other half cut off as much as necessary to keep it healthy. Also, half of the hypothetical customers were attractive and the other half were uggos. Uggos, of course, is a scientific term determined by a panel of 56 random women. It's the Uggo scale. You can't argue with it. It's science. Subjects were asked to write down in centimeters how much hair they would cut off from each potential customer. And you'll never guess what they found. That's right. Nothing, basically. Okay, let's get into it. Technically, they did find the result in their paper's title. Intrasexually competitive women advised other women to cut off more hair, but not really. So here's a chart that shows all the conditions and how many centimeters the women recommended the clients cut off. The first thing you should notice is the vertical y-axis, which shows that the maximum difference in amount of hair cut across all conditions for clients with healthy hair is 1.2 centimeters and 2.5 centimeters for damaged hair. Now, I'm an American. I don't deal in centimeters. So to figure this out, I had to bust out my trusty snap bracelet / ruler to see what 2.5 centimeters looks like. And as you can see, that's this much. That's this much hair. Okay. If I told my hairdresser not to cut any hair at all, and then I went back to reading text on my phone for 30 minutes and didn't pay attention to what she was doing, I would have no idea that she cut off 2.5 centimeters. For my fellow Americans, I know this is hard to imagine. So in order to help, I wanted you to know that it's 2.5 centimeters is approximately the length of this .45 automatic spent bullet casing that I found on a walk around my neighborhood this morning. So for Americans, it's a bullet amount of hair. And that was the maximum amount. Highly intersexually competitive subjects cut off only 2 millimeters more hair than low intersexually competitive subjects. That's this much. It's this much. It's so tiny. Not only are we talking about very tiny measurements, but just have a look at those error bars. They are 4 millimeters wide. That's, for my American friends, twice as much as the difference they found. But wait, there is one more fun thing about this study. Of all the variables in this data, the only condition that barely managed to support the hypothesis in the first study was highly intersexually competitive women recommending haircuts specifically to the uggos. That's problematic for the authors, considering that the scale they use to determine intersexual competitiveness is mostly questions specifically about how these women feel about more attractive or otherwise higher value women. Like, here's the scale. It's got things like, I can't stand it when I meet another woman who is more attractive than I am. I tend to look for negative characteristics in attractive women. I wouldn't hire a very attractive woman as a colleague. I just don't like very ambitious women. I tend to look for negative characteristics in women who are very successful. I wouldn't hire a highly competent woman as a colleague. I like to be funnier and more quick-witted than other women. I want to be just a little better than other women. I always want to beat other women. I don't like seeing other women with a nicer house or a nicer car than mine. It's literally almost entirely questions about feeling competitive towards women you see as being better than you. But this study showed that these highly competitive women were only targeting uggos. So the authors were forced to redo the study, this time asking a panel of 52 female sexiness judges to sort the faces into attractive, uggo, and now a third group, average. Also, instead of allowing the subjects to answer in an open-ended manner, this time they forced them to have a multiple choice. They could say, cut 1 centimeter or less, 2 centimeters, 3, 4, 5, up to 10, and then more than 10 centimeters, which is interesting because in the first study, no one suggested they cut off more than 6 centimeters. So it's almost like they're priming the subjects to increase the difference between their suggestions for each client. Almost like they were frustrated by the very small difference between groups that was more than covered by their error bars. Anyway, if you look at the data now, and I am begging you to not look at those error bars, you can clearly see that highly competitive women didn't really care about the uggos, but about the average women, who, based on the law of averages, are probably about as attractive as they are. So clearly that means that competitive women are only bothering to sabotage the women who they see as their closest competitors. Yes, that makes sense. Let's publish this study. Unfortunately for the authors, they also asked the subjects to rate each face as either less equally or more attractive than themselves. And that data was plotted according to sexual competitiveness. As you can see in this chart, highly competitive women cut the most hair off the women they thought were uglier than them. And then the women they thought were hotter. And finally, they actually cut the least hair off of the women they felt were of equivalent attractiveness. So there goes that hypothesis. All of which leads me to this inevitable conclusion. I haven't been paying much attention for the past few years because I've been distracted by a pandemic, but sadly it turns out that evolutionary psychologists are still up to their old tricks, making up silly studies to prove that women are catty bitches and publishing them in journals that will never, ever ask anyone to reproduce these results. The depressing coda to all of this, All the researchers involved in this paper appear to be women. Sorry, sisters, but it's a publisher-perish world, and I truly believe that women can be just as ambitious as men. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. If you loved the video, please subscribe. And if you think the world could use more videos like this and you happen to have a few bucks laying around, head to patreon.com/Rebecca and join an awesome community of nerds like the people whose names you see on the screen right now. Thanks.